Protests erupted in Iran after the regime agreed to move forward with a peace deal with the United States. And what appeared on the streets was not an image of victory, but a sign of internal division. This Monday, June 15, 2026, the topic dominates international news because the Iranian government tried to present the negotiation as a diplomatic maneuver. But the more radical base of the regime itself saw something else. Backing down in the face of Trump, loss of control over the Strait of Hormuz, and fear of a political surrender disguised as a pause. In Tehran and Mashhad, hardline supporters took to the streets against Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and against the President of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, accusing both of paving the way for a humiliating concession. The agreement under discussion provides for the reopening of Hormuz, temporary relief of sanctions on oil, negotiations over frozen assets, and limits on new actions in the nuclear program. While the parties discuss a final deal within 60 days for Trump, this move gives the White House a brutal victory. It forces the regime to sit down, accept the pressure, and explain to its own radicals why it is negotiating with the enemy it had sworn to confront. For Iran, the crisis stayed at home, which is what the agreement delivered. Why did the hardliners panic? How did Trump push the regime into this split? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward, no-nonsense content, consider subscribing, because here we have videos like this every day. The revolt started because the regime's hardline factions didn't buy into the official narrative of victory. They looked at the draft of the agreement and saw a loss of leverage. Reuters reported that the text under discussion includes the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to commercial ships and the gradual lifting of the American naval blockade on Iranian ports. The package also includes a promise that Washington will not impose new sanctions before a final agreement. In addition to the possible release of $25 billion in frozen Iranian assets as part of a larger negotiation. In the nuclear field, Iran would agree not to produce or acquire nuclear weapons, and it would keep its program at its current state without expanding enrichment or facilities. While the final discussion hasn't happened yet, for the radical wing, this is not a triumph, it's the regime accepting limits. After weeks of saying they wouldn't give in, the protests targeted Abbas Araghchi and Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf directly. The Jerusalem Post reported protests in Tehran and Mashhad, with demonstrators accusing Araghchi of being a national disgrace and holding Ghalibaf accountable for what they call blood spilled by the leader. The target was not chosen by chance. Araghchi, not Ghalibaf, is the diplomatic face of the negotiation. Ghalibaf is a prominent figure within the Iranian political structure and is associated with the attempt to defend the agreement as a possible solution. Trump enters this crisis with a clear political advantage. Military, economic, and diplomatic pressure has put Iran at a table where every concession becomes ammunition against the regime itself. While part of the Western press tries to treat the agreement as a sinister sign of American retreat, the reaction inside Iran shows a different perspective. If it were a clear victory for Tehran, regime militants wouldn't be out on the streets accusing their own negotiators of treason. The internal outburst reveals that the agreement struck a nerve. The negotiation stopped being just a conversation between diplomats and turned into a struggle for political control of the Islamic Republic. The problem for Araghchi and Ghalibaf is not just the street, it's the atmosphere of mistrust created among clerics, military, and political factions. The news circulating points to a regime struggling to convince its own allies that it is still in control. The prolonged absence of strong public signals from the supreme leader has fueled theories, insecurity, and behind-the-scenes disputes. In closed systems, when the top leadership does not project strength, each faction tries to claim it is defending the regime's survival. That's when the deal with Trump becomes fuel for the military and political split. One group wants to buy time, catch their breath, and avoid greater destruction, while another group prefers to maintain the rhetoric of resistance, even if that deepens isolation and further erosion. Tehran also saw scenes of confrontation and police pressure against groups aligned with the regime, according to reports circulating in videos and local channels. The main information is that the security forces had to contain precisely the groups that usually serve as the power base. This changes the tone of the situation. It's not just about popular opposition against the government. The crisis now appears within the revolutionary camp itself. When the regime needs to control its own militants, the image of unity collapses. The Iranian media and figures linked to the regime tried to frame the memorandum as a strategic pause. The narrative is that the 60 days would serve to negotiate better, reorganize capabilities, and prevent immediate collapse. But this explanation also carries a risk. When the government admits it needs time to rebuild its strength, it confirms that the pressure worked. Trump created a scenario in which Iran needs to choose between continuing to take hits on the diplomatic and military fronts or accepting a text that its radicals call surrender. Neither of the two options is comfortable for Tehran. Israel also enters this equation as a decisive factor. Reuters reported attacks coming from Lebanon against northern Israel at the beginning of June and the interception of rockets in a tense environment with Hezbollah. This matters because any agreement with Iran runs up against the behavior of Tehran's allied groups. If Hezbollah continues provoking Israel, the pressure on the Iranian regime increases. For Israel, the logic is simpler. If there is a threat, there will be a response. And for Trump, this keeps the pressure on Iran without giving the regime the peace of mind it wanted. The United Arab Emirates also appeared at the center of the information dispute. There were reports pointing to a possible release of billions of dollars linked to Iranian funds, but the Emirati government denied that it had released, transferred, or moved frozen assets to Tehran. Then on June 15, 2026, Reuters reported that the United Arab Emirates called for the full implementation of the preliminary agreement between the United States and Iran, with an immediate end to hostilities, and freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. This point carries weight because the United Arab Emirates has been affected by regional instability and wants security along energy and trade routes. Tehran tried to turn money and threats into leverage, but the public denial weakened the narrative that the regime had already secured a guaranteed financial victory. The reaction from the Hardliners shows that the agreement did not resolve the Iranian political war. It only brought the internal conflict to light. The Pay Daddy Front and ultra-conservative figures treat the negotiation as a dangerous concession. Government allies respond that the critics are using old versions of the text or distorting points of the negotiation. The result is a regime speaking several languages at the same time. One group says they won, another says there was betrayal, and another tries to convince the population that everything will still be negotiated. This noise is exactly the kind of crack that Trump knows how to exploit well. The strain is growing because Iran built its propaganda on the idea of absolute resistance against the United States. Now the government appears to be surrendering to Washington's terms, trying to preserve some economic margin and promising to limit nuclear actions while discussing the future of the. For the radicals, it sounds like humiliation. For Trump, it's proof that sanctions, military force, and tough negotiation can produce results without treating the regime as a reliable partner. I'm Milson Alves, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end take a look at the comments. That way, you can be even more engaged with the community. Wilson Alves, hugs, hugs.